You are listening to the Enormocast.
Does your partner suffer from try-it-again syndrome? Or one-hangitis? Or even worse, delusional performance disorder? Well, there really isn't a cure for DPD, except for a good smackdown. But it does probably mean that you've been belaying them for hours and hours on end, and are now suffering from BNP, or belaying neck pain, a stiffness in the cervical spine just below the occipital region of your thick skull. But now there's a cure for BNP resulting from DPD. Ask your doctor about belay specs, and when he doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, just smile and tuck that prescription for opiates away for your next overseas plane flight. But then ask several strangers about belay specs. Ask that cute barista at the coffee shop on the corner about belay specs. In fact, ask everyone you know about belay specs. Keep talking about belay specs until nobody wants to climb with you anyway. Problem solved. But if that doesn't work, then go to belayspecs.com and get yourself a pair. And don't forget to enter Enormocast at checkout for a discount and to help out the podcast. Side effects may include people thinking you're staring at them when you're not, old trad climbers rolling their eyes, people putting them on for the first time and saying, "Ooh, that's trippy," people insisting they don't like those weird glasses even though they've never even tried them. If you feel drowsy, nauseous, or rumbling in your stomach, horny, confused, or have strange, vivid dreams, this probably has nothing to do with belay specs. It is more likely from that bug you picked up in that backpacker's hostel in Rio after 5 too many caipirinhas. Belayspecs.com. Say adios to belayer neck pain. So let's say you've taken the advice you've heard on the Enormocast and played it ice climbing cool with that special climbing friend, going on trip after trip like your family, even though you've had the hots for him or her since they burned you off your proj and flips in a ratty pair of Yojimbos from the Lost and Found. Well, if the perfect belay isn't conveying your longing, perhaps the climbing-inspired jewelry and accessories of Peter Gilroy will help you put the punctuation on that date that's not a date, might be a date, climbing date. At peterwgilroy.com, you'll find jewelry, money clips, belt buckles, hats, and more, all inspired by the rock in the mountains on which your love has flourished. So please, before you resort to the lean-in or the forgotten sleeping bag or the embarrassing confessional after a 12-pack around the campfire, try a classier approach with a spectacular gift from peterwgilroy.com. And if you crash and burn, know that Peter and Enormocast still appreciate your support, even if your partner does short rope you to the curb. And remember, enter Enormo at checkout for a discount. But keep that part to yourself.
We gotta get
Listen, where are you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
a
big
house. We
place,
sold
that
it out.
side of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000
seats?
We really should.
Look, you better get up there before he panics. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Bad weather. Now or later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Calise. It is October 16th, almost 10 o'clock, Mountain Standard Time. Not the dark time yet. We still got a couple weeks left before the darkness descends, the crushing darkness. This is episode 114 of the Enormocast, a conversation with Kolin Powick. Who is Kolin Powick? Well, most importantly, he assures me Kolin Powick is Canadian. Very, very Canadian, and he wants us to know that. Secondly, he is the director of objects. No, the director of categories, the category director, something like that at Black Diamond Equipment. But what he is in charge, relatively in charge, probably thinks he's in charge of the people who design much of the climbing gear over at Black Diamond and has been there for quite some time. So we talked to Kolin about all that stuff, about the uses and misuses of gear, where it all comes from, how it gets built, how strong it is, all those sorts of things. But before I get to that, I wish to issue a couple apologies. Apology one is to Adeline Gay, who was on the Ladies' Night episode back a couple years ago, episode 54, 55, something like that. Anyway, the reason I'm apologizing to Adeline is that I said Pee-wee was the first person on the show who hails from Quebec, but that's not true because Adeline is from Quebec, although she lives in Moab, Utah, and probably plans never to return to the Great White North, although maybe I just alerted immigration. So apology number 2, Adeline. Anyway, okay, second apology, as long as we're talking about ladies tonight, is, it's been kind of dude heavy over here at the Enormocast, and that is not entirely my fault. It's just been sort of a coincidence, but the last 3 interviews I've had booked with ladies got moved or canceled, didn't happen for some reason or another. Mostly just scheduling and something came up. But yeah, and it just coincidentally, it was 3 of the women that all canceled. And so we're stuck with lots of guys lately over here at the Enormocast. So I do my best, and I hopefully will have all 3 of those women back on the show. It had nothing to do with anything besides scheduling, so hopefully we'll get them back on, and always looking for more. So again, I just kind of noticed it recently as I'm editing through these things, like, oh man, another dude. But it's the way it goes sometimes, I'm a mercenary, just looking for interviews under every rock, and lately I've just been finding lots of dudes under those rocks. So my apologies, hopefully more women soon.
Just wanna do something special for all the ladies in the world. Just wanna do something special for all the ladies in the world. And the girls, but don't forget them Caribbean, ladies, Parisian, ladies, Bolivian, ladies, Namibian, East Indochinian, Republic of Dominican, Amphibian, Presbyterian, out of sight, amazing lady, late night, hard-working lady, erudite.
Okay, Kolin Powick, what is he doing on the show? Well, as you know, Black Diamond is a sponsor of the Enormocast, and so I tend to have quick and easy access to those folks, speaking of being a mercenary. But the truth is that Colin's been a fan of the show since before Black Diamond came on board. I know it seems like they've been here forever, but I did go it alone up there with just me and Bonfire Coffee, although they were Defiant Bean Coffee back then in the beginning. And Kolin was on board, sending me emails, telling me he enjoyed the show from the beginning. And so we've been friends, and we got to talking a few times and kind of kept talking about how it would be cool to have somebody on the show that really knows gear, understands how it works, its strengths, its weaknesses, the myths, the mistakes, all the different things that go into gear, and also kind of where it comes from, how and why people bother making it so we can buy it and use it. So yeah, Colin's on the show today to talk about all that stuff. Smart guy, been in the business a long time, also a great climber, really good climber, and a climbing fool, somebody who lives it. Both alpine climbing, rock climbing, whatever. He's actually, like many Canadians who have 3-month summers, 2-month summers, he's a really good ice climber. So that's kind of part of his thing over at Black Diamond as well. So today's show is about gear, and hopefully you'll learn something. Maybe become a little more safe out there. And I want to mention really quickly that other companies, including Petzl, have gotten in touch with me about these sorts of issues, or answered my questions about these sorts of issues, and even offered to do a similar type show. And it just happens to be that it worked out with me and Kolin. But I do want to thank other folks for reaching out to try to help you guys be a little more safe out there. Well, maybe we'll come back around with some other engineers down the road. All right, hope you enjoy it. Nerding out on gear with Kolin Powick. Lo, these past few months, I've been trying to get you, the listener, to support the Enormocast by buying new climbing shoes from Sportiva. But did you feel that chill in the air this morning? That coolness that'll start to draw the masochists from their dark, dry tooling lairs? Well, Sportiva makes mountain boots, or if you're a Honnold, crampon-ready sneakers, to get you up the gnarliest, iciest project your semi-dormant limbic cortex has dreamed up over the happy days of summer. So it's probably time to start shopping for those, if rock climbing is just too fun for you. And they've got trail running shoes for your pre-masochism masochism. So go check it out, Sportiva.com, or your nearest outdoor retailer, the Enormocast and Sportiva, like two bros in a bivy sack.
There's not, and it's just a matter of trying to educate the climbers out there, which is what I'm trying to do, with these QC labs and stuff like that.
So that's kind of the impetus for the QC lab. What is a QC?
Quality control. Yeah, it used to be called QC with KP because I was
pretty obvious.
Yeah,
quality control. Thanks.
It used yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and the QC lab, to answer your question, it started off. It was called QC with KP because I was kind of the guy that did it. And I didn't really like that because I don't actually do much. It's the whole team that's doing all the work. So we changed it to QC Lab. And the reason that all started was years ago. I mean, I'm always out climbing and I'm always seeing all kinds of sketchy stuff happen at the cliffs or seeing sketchy gear. So I'm always replacing sketchy draws or slings off of trees from ice climbs or whatever and bring them into the lab and breaking them and finding out how strong stuff is. And people are generally interested in that kind of stuff. So it just started being this thing where I would break this stuff and then throw out this data for the public to see, just to go, oh, wow, like, don't trust everything that's out there.
Yeah, and I mean, and you guys, like, as gear manufacturers, you were talking about how, in one of the QCs I read, you were talking about the ratings that are set. I think it was in the one about the gear loop or the haul loop.
Oh, yeah.
And how the ratings are set. What is full strength depends on certain gear.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
and it's who's the body that sets that? Is it the UIAA?
Yeah, the UIA is part of it. There's also the CE standards. So in order to sell equipment into Europe, you need to meet what's called the CE requirements. And there's these EN standards, and you have to meet that. And then the UIA is this body that's basically takes the CE standards and maybe has a little bit above and beyond that.
And that's their like alpinism.
Basically,
What is it? The United International
Association of Alpinists or something like that.
Yeah.
So they create these standards that the product needs to meet or can meet for UIA, must meet for the CE. And it's unfortunately it's not super clear. So is it full strength? Is it full strength?
Right.
And I wrote that one fairly recently about, well, what does full strength even mean?
Yeah.
Because it depends on what you're talking about. A sling is different than a beaner. It's different than a harness. It's different than
when I was reading that and being a guy who climbed in the past big walls, and you're hauling your haul line, and then there's that terrifying accident where your haul bag somehow comes loose while it's attached to you.
Oh, man.
So then I was like, well, you don't really even want a full strength.
No, you would want it to break. Tommy Caldwell,
it happened at TC.
Exactly. When he was on the Donwall, his haul bag cut loose. It wasn't a massive one, but it went, and he felt it. He was injured and went down.
Yeah. So, because it's like you'd want it to kind of tear away. So
yeah,
I mean, less than probably. I mean, you're really supposed to just
tag the line,
in the line on it anyway.
Exactly.
So, it doesn't have to be.
It's a tough one because some people think that the haul loop is a belay loop in the back, and and you could tie in. They do. They think that, and you could tie in. You could tie in with it, and rappel face first, and all this kind of stuff.
Oh right, the Australian rappellers.
Yeah, but the haul loop, it's called the haul loop for hauling, and the belay loop's called the belay loop because you belay on it.
Right.
The haul loop also commonly known as a place where you clip your oval carabiner in your chalk bag.
Right.
Which is not ideal, but. We talked about that previously.
Yeah, but you're still working on that one, right?
That one's going to be a big one. It's coming.
Okay.
Yeah.
The why you wear a chalk bag belt or tie it on with a piece of cord.
There's reasons.
There is reasons.
Yeah.
It's not just fashion.
That's right.
Yeah, because I think I don't know. Cedar might have brought that up.
It was Cedar.
It
was Cedar. It was great. Yeah, he was giving people some tips, and they were super accurate.
Yeah. Well, so I kind of wanted to have you on to sort of just give this kind of overview of some of the things we think about gear versus some of the things, the reality of gear, how it works, how long it lasts, also what goes into creating a product.
Yeah.
Because I think that's sort of I just actually posted something on Facebook. I was sort of harping on the fact that professional climbers don't keep their websites updated. And then, some of the comments, well, who cares, and then somebody said like, oh, I wish it was just, there weren't any professional climbers. And my reaction was, well, without the pros and the industry and all that, like we don't get all this sweet gear, like if we're not like supporting the industry, and that can include pro climbers,
right,
then there's no reason for you guys to go down the path to make an expensively built, Camelot or
exactly
whatever company it has to be, the Gree or the anything out there,
Exactly. I mean, all those from athletes to end consumers to employees to anyone gives feedback, and the athletes are a big part of that.
Right.
Of like, hey, I need this. This would be great. Can you guys do this? The athletes are great to work with because they're out climbing more than anybody usually, and they're really pushing the limits. So it helps us push our limits too.
Yeah, and it's also been a thing where we've talked about the popularity of climbing and the massive kind of influx of people into climbing in the last like decade.
Yeah,
and I generally try to stay positive about that, but inside in my own inner world, I can't really think of any advantage to like crowding at the cliffs, except the fact that, again, when there's a market, then there's a reason to innovate. There's a reason to make new stuff that's better, but only if there's going to be people out there buying it.
Exactly.
It's not like you guys are developing gear or any other companies developing gear out of the kindness of your hearts. Although you guys personally, you've told me a lot of times that there's the engineering department and all you guys are climbers, and so in a lot of ways you are creating gear, but you wouldn't be allowed to create gear.
Right.
just so you
it's
guys
the customer
get to
base
use
that
it.
affords us the opportunity to be able to make this stuff, because ultimately we just want to go climbing.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's just get this out of the way. I did want to talk to you about the recalls that BD has had recently. Yeah. Can you just sort of give us an overview of that? Because the information got out there, I think, was disseminated pretty widely, but then with all recalls like that, you kind of wonder, A, what happened, B, or what happened to cause it, but also B, what happened afterwards. Did you get a lot of stuff back? Did you find things that were scary? Did anybody get hurt out there with
nobody got hurt.
Yeah, well, what specifically were the things again?
So, yeah, unfortunately, all these things happen really close to each other, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which way you look at it. And to be honest, I can't remember the order, but we had a couple things with some carabiners with missed rivets, a sling that wasn't sewn correctly, via ferrata, not super popular in North America, but a via ferrata lanyard system that wasn't sewn correctly, and some cams that had some missed rivets. And all this stuff happened really close to each other. And this was back in January, early February. And the root cause, to sum it up, is basically we had too much going on. We used to make a lot of our product in China for the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And then we were bringing all that manufacturing back to Salt Lake City, which is a great thing, I think, for a bunch of different reasons. And we were basically too much, too fast. The systems that we had in China, we couldn't really just box them up and slam them into Salt Lake and think that they would work perfectly. We had a new workforce as we were expanding to bring all this manufacturing back, and just really too much going on. And it's not an excuse, it's just the reality. If that's really what happened. Our systems weren't robust enough, the workforce, and just lots happening. So what happened is we discovered some of these issues within our own walls, and then basically had a freak out, oh, this is not good. What are we going to do about this?
So you found the problem. It didn't come in from the outside?
It was a mix. Yeah. So we had the first issue that came from the outside from a dealer that said, I think it was a carabiner, said, hey, I've found this carabiner. And we immediately, freak out. We put the whole place on lockdown, and then we started looking at what's going on and could this happen more? How did this happen at all? And then is there any more out there? And there's, teams assembled and, late night meetings and everyone kind of running around like idiots looking at this stuff. And then we quickly realized, okay, we're unhappy with what we found, and we need to issue a recall. And while we do that, we are going to start looking at all the other systems and processes and lines in place. And that's where we're discovering some of this other stuff. And then unfortunately, it was a little bit of a snowball effect. We were like, okay, we could have an issue here. We could have an issue here. We could have an issue here. So we clumped them all together and said, okay, we're going to issue recalls for this. Now, recall is an interesting word. We have to use that word in North America. When we issued these recalls for these carabiners, we didn't want everyone to send all their carabiners back. It was really a request for inspection because looking at the stuff is relatively straightforward. So the word recall is in there, but it's like, hey, if you have carabiners within this date range, have a look at it. If you have these issues, send it back and we'll get you a new one. So that's really how it all went down with all those products. And in the end of the day, the number of issues we found was really small. Like one is too many for sure. But at the end of the day, I think we got 20 carabiners returned out of 1.3 million of that date range. I think we found 1 or 2 cams internally and 1 returned externally, like from a customer. 1 via Ferrata returned and 1 index ascender returned. So the volumes were low. We don't know if we've caught everything yet. Sure. We're still trying to get the word out there. So the volumes were low, but still unacceptable. And then the resultant, I guess, of that is actually a little bit of a silver lining, is made us look a lot harder at our processes as we were still ramping Salt Lake City manufacturing back up to speed. And we've done just an enormous amount of, right now, like redundant inspection. We've added all kinds of additional inspection in the process. We're talking about optical systems to inspect for rivets and stuff like this. We've rejiggered our quality department, focused more energy on the production side downstairs. There's been a whole list of things that we've done. Our process, our material handling, the way that we handle the material as it comes in from a raw material, as well as what we call WIP, work in process. We've just re-looked at everything from head to toe to avoid this from happening in the future, of course.
Oh, I had a question about the Camelots.
Yeah.
So was this imminent time bomb failure kind of stuff?
No,
or was it something where it was going to work loose or over time or whatever? Super
good question. So the Camelot specifically, rivets on the one side of the axles weren't formed. And honestly, I'd say give it some 99% chance. If you had a Camelot in your hand and actuated the trigger twice, the lobe would just fall off. So it's not like it was very unlikely that you'd be mid-route, place it, climb past it, and have an issue. Like it was very clear.
Okay.
It was very clear.
That would be terrifying.
Yeah. And
if you pulled it off your harness and pulled the trigger and the lobe
and you're
just
like,
flew
whoa.
Off, and then you're just like, okay, how many of these other ones below me?
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Not preferred.
All right.
Not preferred. But yeah, that one was fairly obvious. The Via Ferrata was a sewing issue. That's actually not that obvious. So you really have to look at that one to understand what's going on, because it could look like it's complete and functional, and it's not.
And so far as you guys know, there hasn't been any accident
no
attributed
accidents
to this in
no
terms of failure in the field.
No, for sure. And if there was, of course we would hear about it. We hear about accidents that are usually pilot error with our gear. We hear about accidents that are usually pilot error with other people's gear.
Right.
So if there was ever anything out there that happened, we would definitely hear about it.
So let's talk about that. We'll just seg into that. And with the accidents, again, we were sort of just chatting a couple nights ago, kind of in preparation for this, but it also gave us the idea to sit down and do this. You were talking about how just that, when accidents happen, whether it's with your gear, other gear, some other company's gear, a lot of times there is kind of this gathering of the minds to look at what happened, and without sharing trade secrets or whatever else, discuss gear possibilities, how to fix it, how to make stuff better. Can you sort of maybe give us a real world sort of example of maybe some accident we might have heard of that prompted this kind of review, and almost like soul searching, but in a technical level?
So there's this UIA that we talked about earlier. There's these UIA meetings that happen once a year, and where the technical folks from these different manufacturers and technical representatives from each country get together, and we talk about the standards, the UIA standards. Are they up to date? Should they be tweaked? And one of the things we talk about is accidents. And over the years, I've been going on and off to these meetings for 14 years. And so I've become friends with all of these guys at all these other companies, from DMM and Metolius and Petzl and Camp Casino and all these guys, Edelrid. So anytime there's an issue in the field, like we're really all in this together. There is this truly kind of a brotherly kind of vibe, and we all want to work on this together to make sure that climbers are out there having a good time and they're doing it safely. Because it's in all of our best interest to make sure that climbers are out there and they're doing it safely, right? So if there's an issue, usually we'll get together and we'll talk about it and we'll go, well, was this one-off or a pilot error? Or is there something that we can do as manufacturers in order to ensure this doesn't happen again? And the most recent one that comes to mind, maybe not super popular, especially in North America, though, was a Via Ferrata accident several years ago where the lanyards broke on a Via Ferrata when a climber fell, which is horrifying to think of, just falling on a Via Ferrata. I'm not sure if you've ever done one, but it's like a metal ladder up the rock, and to think about falling down one of those and smacking your chin the whole way down would be heinous. But there was an issue with the lanyard that broke, and what happened is these lanyards usually have a bungee inside, and just the cyclic of the bungee and the grit and the dirt ended up just basically weakening the structural webbing, and then when the climber fell, the lanyard broke.
Wow,
So,
this person was really into Via Ferratas to like use it enough, or maybe it was from a guiding
It could have
company.
been a rental. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah,
Like it was probably something that was getting used for the guiding, because those things get guided like
They
crazy.
do.
But
But Via Ferrata, some people are fully into it. I mean, it's pretty fun, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like you're moving the whole time in the mountains. So this accident happened, and it was super crushing. And then so even before the meeting started, a bunch of us started, exchanging emails and talking about, okay, what is this? Why did this happen? And let's do some experiments. And everyone's got these labs, so we're all doing our own versions of experiments to try to determine what's going on. And it's very collegial, and we're trying to figure out, does the standard cover this kind of thing? Like, did something happen that wasn't really covered in the standard? That should we tweak the standard and improve it to ensure that future products come out that this won't happen again? And that's exactly what happened with this Via Ferrata situation. And the standard is actually still being tweaked. It's not actually published yet, the new standard. Mm-hmm. But we determined that the cyclic wear of the lanyards is an issue depending on the way, the construction of the lanyard and the grit and all this kind of stuff. So a bunch of us, we all like donate gear and to each other and to test everybody's on different test machines that we just create. And then we say, okay, we believe that in order to make a safe Via Ferrata in the future, it should meet X number of cycles at whatever load and all this kind of stuff. And then we all basically pitch it to the UIAA and say, we think the standard needs to be updated. And then it goes through a bunch of cycles and reviews, and then it ends up becoming a published standard.
Well, it's interesting that this all that operation costs all these companies money.
Yeah.
Because you're being paid to do all these sorts of things. So it's kind of interesting that, it's not just like the manufacturer of that particular lanyard's problem, and you guys back off and say, well, you got to fix your scene over there, folks.
No, I'm sure there's some cases where it's a little bit of that. You kind of like, whoa, dude, that's a bummer, but you're on your own, or like, good luck fixing that situation. Mm-hmm. But in something like this, it's, again, to repeat myself, it's in everybody's best interest to make sure that we make good gear out there, right? So we're really just trying to up the bar. Mm-hmm. And so that's what happens. And it happens, I don't want to say accidents happen all the time, but this kind of stuff, these kind of discussions happen often. Mm-hmm. We're all friends, all of us, and we meet at these trade shows every year in Germany and in here, and we just talk sometimes casually about this kind of stuff, and then sometimes sit down officially and have working groups and put some math and some science and some money behind this stuff to figure out what's the best way to go.
Right.
Yeah.
So what other kind of gear failure issues can you sort of point to in terms of like maybe even educating us on using it wrong, in terms of not gear failure in terms of manufacturer problem or whatever, but gear failure in terms of misuse that's somewhat common?
Yeah. So we actually don't see a lot of manufacturing issues out in the field. Like almost everything that I've ever seen that's been an accident or a near accident in the field has been some kind of pilot error.
Right. Thank God for lawyers.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, no, I've always thought about that, because obviously like liability in the US and like people suing each other is a huge problem at times.
Right.
But I'm always like, well, you know what keeps these manufacturers like on the straight
on the toes, man.
is that they could get the whole thing pulled out from underneath them, somewhat like what happened to
That's
Shinar.
how Black Diamond started. Exactly.
So the lawyers are keeping us safe in that sense.
Yeah,
even
exactly.
if they're
little bit of fear.
Yeah,
it's always good
to keep you guys working on this stuff. So,
but I personally see every piece of broken climbing gear or hear about every accident involving especially BD gear and sometimes other people's gear. For sure, the number one ththing that happens is carabiners breaking in the field, and almost every single time it's what we call nose hook. So it's not a key lock type carabiner. It's one with the nose hook on it. And if it gets hung up on a cam sling or a bolt hanger is really common, or a stopper wire, the load that it takes to break a carabiner when it's hung up like that is like nothing. Twice body weight, you can just bounce and it's going to snap. And it's I don't want to say fairly common, but I probably see at least one a year, sometimes 2 or 3 a year of that issue. And it's really easy to determine because it breaks in a different way than any other carabiner that's broken. I mean, at Black Diamond, the quality guys, the testing guys, we break a lot of gear during the development and during the production cycle, so we know how stuff breaks. Mm-hmm. So when you see something in the field and somebody sends an email and they're just letting us know, or maybe they're choked and they want to sue or whatever, and they send a photo, hey, I broke and this beaner broke and I'm not happy about it. We can just even look at a photo or the part and just go, oh, well, this is likely what happened. And you explain it calmly to them and you go, is this possible? And then usually, 99 times out of 100, they're like, oh yeah, that's probably what happened, and they're cool with it. And I wrote a QC Lab article about that one because it is fairly common about the nose hook one.
Right.
So that's the one for sure that you hear the most. And webbing too, webbing doesn't last forever. Nylon and Dyneema abrasion is really hard on, especially fixed draws. Blowing in the wind, sharp limestone or granite edge, just tweaking away all the little structural fibers. And then you'll hear people, climbing on some route at the VRG, the draws have been hanging for 12 years and then take a big whipper and a draw snaps and, luckily the next one catches them or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's usually what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything else that comes to mind?
Those are definitely the main ones. Sharp edges, you don't hear about it. You fear that a lot, a sharp edge carabiner, because a lot of the time on fixed draws, especially, usually the first bolt or the crux bolt, the rope will wear a groove into a carabiner and make a really sharp edge. Depending on the geometry of the carabiner, the edge can be, different sharpnesses. And that one, for a long time, I hadn't heard of any accidents. And in the last couple of years, I've heard of at least one rope getting cut at the Red, where the climber fell. I think broke his leg, if I recall. There was one rope that got cut by a sharp edge beaner at a gym, I think in North America. And then there was a fatality in Europe, I think a mountain guide up on a multi-pitch route where the rope was pinched between a sharp edge beaner and the rock, and the rope cut and he died. Yeah.
Well, I was also interested I read something, and you probably saw this as well, but that like the counterintuitive thing about it is that oftentimes it's actually not like the crux draw that's the worst, because the way the rope runs across the draws below there as it's being pulled through, like sharpens them in a way that falling directly on it kind of creates a round edge.
It's definitely not the fall. It's definitely not the fall that's making it sharp. It's the lowering and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. You'll see it on the first bolt for sure.
Yeah, because of the way the rope runs through there.
Most people stand too far back from the wall.
Sure.
So then it goes at some crazy angle. So that one's popular. Often if the bolt line isn't very straight, if there's one that's off to the side, that bolt will be the one when you're lowering, you can see it like, it's bouncing around. And that's the one that's going to get really sharp.
Yeah. And I mean, fixed draws, it's kind of calmed down. But there's been a lot of pushback against fixed draws in general. And then the solution to these sharpening draws
steel beaners
were the steel beaners. Yeah. But like even in rifle now, like the steel beaners last longer, but they also are getting sharp.
They still get sharp.
It just like takes, 10 times as long.
Yeah.
But with the kind of volume of climbers on some of the warm-ups, they're starting to wear in a couple years themselves.
Yeah.
And then you go to places like, the Red, was one of the places you just said there was an accident, and people are talking about some of these draws being on these routes for 15 years.
Oh yeah.
Like Bill Ramsey said he was appalled to find out that the draws he put on the routes when he put them up were still there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a little bit of laziness and a little bit of like, oh, it's somebody else's problem to deal with changing.
Well,
these
it's only somebody else's problem until you're the one on the route, right? And
Yeah.
then it's become your problem to deal with. So Yeah, I mean, there's been routes at the VRG recently. All the VRG routes were rebolted and new draws, which is nice. But there was draws up on that thing from like the original like Boone Speed era,
Right.
Scary stuff for sure. But yeah, it's every climber kind of takes their own life in their own hands, and they need to be responsible and look at what's going on. And if you're not psyched with what you're climbing on, either back down, replace it yourself, or just get out of there. I mean, because gear doesn't last forever, and the fixed draw thing, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it is really nice to go up there and I'm going to give this route a run. I'm just going to bail, or warm up or whatever. But you can't really trust everything that's out there. You got to be a little aware for sure.
Yeah, and I think even I've heard, people core shotting their ropes, just taking, and not even necessarily falling. And I don't know maybe what happened with the actual accidents, whether it was a fall or not.
Not sure, yeah.
And, because you're like, oh, take on this bolt that's not even the crux because I'm like a little pumped or whatever.
Right.
And I've definitely heard of my even associates, suddenly getting a core shot.
I think we may be talking about the same associate here at Maple, at least anyway, a core shot. And I mean, that's a heart stopper when all of a sudden you see the big white core there.
Well, and also knowing our associates, that rope probably wasn't in the best shape either. So,
and some of our associates are a little bigger than others.
Yeah, it's surprising how people who can get free ropes still like climb on horribly shitty ropes. But yeah, it's just in your DNA to not throw away gear.
It's right. It's the dirtbag climber.
Which brings us to one of your personal kind of like educational. What's the word I'm looking for? Your sort of like public education points, which is of course that gear does not last forever.
It doesn't last forever, and it's a really tough thing to try to convey. It's almost like a two-pronged fork. You have these new climbers that maybe don't really understand climbing gear that well. When you and I started climbing back in the day, we would go out climbing with some friends or maybe a mentor, and if you came home from the weekend and lived, it was a success. That's how it worked, and we read books and figured it out. The young climbers of today, they're going to the gym, and 3 weeks later they're climbing 513, and then they take that outside and they don't have all that background that us old timers kind of have. So I've been trying to just educate people in my own way on these QC labs, and I give talks and stuff like this just about gear doesn't last forever. Gear today is very different than gear from 20 years ago. It's generally lighter for sure. Crampons, carabiners, anything. They're like half the weight as they were 20 years ago. You have these older school climbers that are used to gear lasting longer because it was twice as heavy and twice as burly. Hey, my beaners used to last a long time. I had these crampons for 20 years. Now my crampons are only lasting a couple seasons of tromping around on rocks and climbing ice, and then they're all worn out or they break. And it's like they're half the weight on your feet. So it's just trying to educate these people that, yes, the gear is robust and it goes through all kinds of testing, field testing and lab testing and production testing and all this stuff before it gets to the field. And it is robust. And in most climbing situations, the loads never even get high enough to break gear, at an impact kind of thing. But as far as durability, generally gear is lighter than it was years ago, and it's just not going to last as long. We're talking about climbing gear. Trekking poles are a great example. At Black Diamond, we have heavier aluminum thick-walled trekking poles that are super burly for the guy with the 90-pound pack tromping around in the Adirondacks. And we have these super lightweight carbon fiber little twig poles, and they weigh nothing, and they're amazing. But it's not the same beast, and they're just not going to take the abuse that the big aluminum pole does.
Yeah, and it's probably a bummer because you pay all that money for one, and you're like expect it to last forever,
right?
And
right.
You can like break them on your knee or whatever.
Exactly. But climbers are a different bunch. It's weird the mentality, because if you look at, I'm not a road biker by any means, but I know a bunch of guys, and if you look at that, people are okay with buying this carbon fiber, crazy expensive road bike, and you slam it into a wall and the fork breaks or whatever, and that's understood that that's going to happen, whereas an old aluminum bike, that probably wouldn't have happened. Whereas with climbing gear, the same person, same thing, they're just like, oh, what the hell? My trekking pole broke when I just tripped on it or whatever, and it's like, it's different.
Yeah, well, I think the demographic probably, is a little bit different in terms of willingness to spend money.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and that's just true. And that's just part of
for sure.
The climbing ethos, the dirtbag ethos, the whole thing is like, you don't want to spend money. And so like, you wrap off of a single number 4 nut,
Right.
because that other nut
I need
costs like $7. Like,
Exactly.
so I'm going to risk my life.
Yeah.
Because I need to save this
$7
or $8 or $9 nut.
Yeah.
That anyway, yeah. So I mean, I've always been. I mean, I was that guy, and then you get older and you have income and you start to. But it's still there.
It's
Even
still there.
when I have income, it's still there.
All the climbers are the same.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that kind of question a lot. People, I dropped a beaner from the top of this route, or I dropped my rack off the top of El Cap. Is it still good? Like, I get that all the time.
Who dropped their rack up?
I get that haul bags plummeting from El Cap,
Yeah,
and then
right.
they find the stuff, and it's really tough, because generally, if something were to fall from El Cap, because I've tested some stuff, and if it's functional, if it looks functional, if the action's good on a cam, all that kind of stuff, then it's probably okay. If it looks like a cam and smells like a cam, it's probably a cam and it's probably okay. But if the lobes are bent and the trigger wires are whacked and the axles are all out of cattywampus, then you probably don't want to use it anymore.
Right.
I mean, because I need all the help I can, and the last thing I want to think about when I'm like 20 feet above my last piece is, oh man, is that the one that I dropped off El Cap below me?
Right. Yeah, between me and the ground, or
Right,
whatever. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, so, totally. Yeah. Well, I know it's funny because it's like I said, even as I've preached that very same thing.
Yeah.
Like for me to go back through my rack and chuck like a few cams
It's
that
hard.
I've had for 20 years, or
well,
stop
they're all
using
sentimental,
them.
right?
Yeah,
I did
yeah,
this route with
right.
this, and yeah.
Well, then also I bust them out. It's like, oh, those are for the Indian Creek rack,
Right.
And then you're like, you climb up to the cliff and you're like, well, I'm not using that thing. Like that's the last cam I want to use. Or
Right.
maybe put it 10 feet off the ground when it's still like 5'8" before you get anywhere.
Exactly.
But as soon as you're starting to think about that, then you're just like, well, shit, maybe it's time to not use this cam.
Yeah,
with this,
I mean,
like blown out like white sling on
Oh
it. from-
yeah, please don't. In the back of your head, if you're unsure, then it's probably best to retire and get something new.
Yeah.
Golden rule.
Golden rule.
Yeah.
So you kind of wanted to talk a little bit about gear development, and sort of give us an idea what it takes to bring something from concept to market.
Yeah.
And I think that is actually, I've always kind of been interested, especially after I did the tour,
Yeah.
and met some of the guys, and
Yeah.
or not met them, but saw them toiling away.
Yeah.
And that idea that a climber, because these guys are climbers or they're skiers or whatever they're working on, like comes up with this idea in his head or her head, and then suddenly, they're like, okay, well now I have to design it and bring it to somebody to say. I mean, so tell us about that. Like,
So-
what concept to like on the shelf?
So the way it works is my job as the category director of climbing at BD is like I'm like a funnel. I'm a human funnel. So I get all of these inputs from friends, athletes, and consumers, ideas I have myself. I get all of these inputs in, and then they funnel down, and then I have to look at, okay, is it a viable product to make? And I look at a business case and how long is it going to take to make it. And it's basically a pretty simple business calculation is what's the effort in? Can we sell this thing? And then I have to pitch it around, and then
That
it
doesn't sound simple at all. actually.
it's I mean, the foundation of it's simple. The actual doing it is a little more challenging. And then you pitch it around. You get if it gets approved, okay, we're going to work on this product, this project. Okay, check. So then my job is to write a detailed brief. What does this product need to be? What's it need to weigh? What's it going to cost? All these kind of things, retail prices and all this stuff. What's the market? How big's the market? All this sort of stuff. And then it gets handed to the designers, and the designers, a bunch of climbers and skiers, they're like, okay, we're going to make this new harness or this new ice tool or whatever it may be. And the first phase is a concept phase because we just have the rough idea of what it needs to be. And then these guys are going to start using their ingenuity and new manufacturing processes and technologies and stuff that they've been learning over the years and come up with some ideas. Can we make a nice tool out of plastic? Can we, like whatever it comes down to. And we'll go through a concept phase, and then we'll narrow down the concepts. It looks like this is viable. And this is all on a fairly structured timeline. Mm-hmm. Then it goes through the design phase. Okay, we have a concept. Let's start designing it, and we'll start getting right down to the nitty gritty. These guys doing the 3D modeling. We're going to make rapid prototypes so we can play with these things in our hands. Is this going to work together? Is it going to fit together? Is it manufacturable? There's the design guys on the team. There's the industrial design guys on the team that make things look great. There's quality engineers that do all the testing and manufacturing guys on the team, as well as supply chain guys that have to figure out where we get all these components from. So from concept, design, lots of testing. So we'll get to the place where we're feeling pretty good about it. We'll maybe hand machine some custom prototypes. So a carabiner, for example, anytime we make a carabiner, the first couple we make cost, like $500 each because they're hand machined out of an aluminum block just to play with and make sure they feel good. And then we'll climb on them and feel good about it. Lots of lab testing, lots of field testing, lots of iterate, back to the drawing board, iterate. And then it gets to the point where, okay, we feel pretty good about this thing. We've done a lot of testing, a lot of field testing. Let's make a pilot run. And then it goes to basically sales sample phase where it's, okay, we're going to show it to our sales reps, show it at the trade shows, whether it's the winter or the summer trade show, and then go into production. And that whole process, depending on the project, is 18 months, give or take, from concept, from when you start it to when you're actually making it. There's just a lot that goes into it. And then when it goes into production, then there's all kinds of testing that goes into every product. I'm mainly talking about PPE, personal protective equipment here, climbing gear. Once it goes into production, the quality guys on the production floor, they have to decide, okay, what testing do we want to do through the entire process to ensure that the product that comes out the end is what we want it to be, from raw material testing, work in process testing, and finished goods batch testing, where we go through all that, and then out the end, poof, it goes to the DC, and then it's in your store shelves. And it's there's a lot of effort that goes into it. And I remember years ago, I brought my mom through Black Diamond, and she's not a climber, not an engineer, knows nothing about manufacturing. Showed her the whole process, and her eyes just lit up, and she was like, wow, I thought you'd just call the carabiner store if you needed more carabiners. And I'm like, we are the carabiner store. Somebody needs to make this stuff.
Right.
And there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into it. And anytime I show somebody around, their mind is fairly blown apart with how much work goes into creating a piece of climbing gear, from the concept and the design, all the testing. The testing is actually really cool, but it's also sad because you're just breaking tons of what appears to be perfectly good cams. And you're just breaking them in the machine and testing them and bottoming crack, and you're freezing them and upside down. You're just figuring out all this stuff. Like, what are climbers going to do with this stuff? How can we design around it, or how can we warn against it? Or what do we need to do in order to ensure that these things are going to work in all the situations that we know that people are going to put them in?
Right.
Yeah.
So you freeze the gear just to see if it affects the metal or...
Yeah, I mean, usually it doesn't affect the metal, but if there's, plastics or webbings or whatever, because we know, a lot of this gear is getting used in the Alpine, of course, so we want to understand how it works. And a great example is a helmet. A helmet has plastic, it has foam, depending on how the foam is adhered to the helmet. If we have a thermal shock chamber where we'll freeze it to represent it being in the belly of an airplane, say, at minus 50 Celsius or whatever it is, and then blast it up to 40 Celsius. Let's say you land in Phoenix, and then thermal expansion of different materials is different. And then you don't want something to come loose. So we do a lot of that kind of stuff. Even if we're fairly sure that we know it doesn't matter, we're going to do it anyway, just to be sure.
Man, that's pretty, started trying to predict all the different things that could happen.
Yeah. I mean, we have these books that
airplane. I mean, I would have never gone. Okay. They're on Everest, or they're on, up at rarefied air, but the airplane to Phoenix thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have these books of these test, protocols, regimes that we've created over the years. There's the basic testing that product needs to meet. And to be honest, it's fairly clear and fairly simple. Carabiners, there's a handful of tests: closed gate, open gate, minor access, this kind of stuff. But we know that there's way more things that climbers are doing with this stuff. So we're just going to put it through the ringer. Carabiner, for example, there's not one test in the actual requirement that involves a rope. Right? And climbers use ropes. So we have a drop tower, we do drop tests, we do super gnarly factor 2 drop tests on all kinds of different things, just to try to understand this thing, any product that we're working on as well as we can. And like I say, we try to design around it if we determine that it's an issue, or we'll warn against it in the instructions. And we actually spend a lot of time on the instructions. It's kind of painful because we know nobody reads them, or not many people. I've had the odd person email me saying, hey, in your instructions, I noticed this. And I'm like, wow, you read it. That's great.
There needs to be a comma. You guys missed a comma here.
Yeah.
And the dude,
the grammar's not right.
The guy has a massive headache too from reading the tiniest print on the planet.
Well, we've switched in the last several years to way more illustrations, so there's not so much text.
Right.
But yeah, it is great when people actually read the instructions, but a lot of effort goes into that. That's how Black Diamond was formed when Chenard went under. This is way back in the day, and it was failure to warn. That was the end result of the lawsuit in, I think it was 89, was failure to warn. So we spent a lot of effort, and all the companies do, looking at instructions and going, okay, what do you have to be careful about when you're using this? It's not so much how to use the product. It's in there too, but it's really about what to watch for, how to inspect it, how to store it, all that there's all that stuff in the instructions. So you've probably never looked at.
Not really, no, because it's funny because my girlfriend's a lawyer, and whenever these issues come up, I sort of condescendingly call it her people. That's because of your people. Yeah. Because she actually complained to me like, why does you buy a carabiner and it's got that like massive
it's got a brick on it. Yeah.
She's like, this seems so wasteful. Why do they put this on there? I was
27
like, that's your
languages.
people.
27
that's because
languages.
of your people.
Yeah.
Your people got rich forcing these companies to like do all this sort of stuff. So
yeah, we've tried back to the UIA thing. We've tried to talk about that because it is kind of wasteful. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of paper. I mean, we sell a lot of carabiners, and each carabiner has one of those instruction booklets. We've tried to figure out ways. Can we just do it online or electronically or something? Because it's your girlfriend's people.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, I'm sure they're like, it's like a subpoena. It has to like pass through your hand at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Like because you do have to like fight it off of the carabiner.
Yeah.
So I guess a case could be made that like the person touched it.
It was on there.
They should have read it.
Yeah.
Well, if they had to like go to a website later, that would be, I think, probably too much distance for the lawyers to handle.
And the argument is not everyone has a computer.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those illiterate climbers out there are hosed.
But so
you're on your own.
We do spend a lot of time on that instruction. So if you're bored one day sitting in your van in the rain, just have a look.
Have a look.
Yeah.
And if you read what's a crazy language that's on?
Yeah, there's all kinds. There's 26 or 27. I forget now. There's lots of languages on there.
Lots of languages.
Lots of pretty pictures though too.
What were some of the QCs that you thought of?
Well, we talked about the nose hook one. Okay. There's, I get these QC lab ideas. Either I create them in my brain. Some of the QA guys, figure them out. I get questions. I get quite a few questions from climbers or from employees about, hey, have you thought about this? Hey, have you tested this? Kelly Cordes emailed me a while ago, and I think it's maybe the last one that I posted about triaxial loading and stuff like that. People just curious about things. JT, who works at Black Diamond, he was like, I always wondered if when I do a long rappel, my belay device is really hot, and if it touches my sling that I'm tethered to the next anchor at, wrapping off a multi-pitch, will it melt the sling?
Oh yeah, that's actually a damn good question.
It's a good question.
Yeah. Did you guys do that one yet?
Yeah, we did.
Oh,
yeah, it's on there. You should read it.
I thought I saw. Yeah, actually, I saw you had like a
heat
hair
gun
dryer or heat gun.
Yeah,
I was gonna say a hair
looks
dryer.
like a hair dryer.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a heat gun, and so we went out. We do a bunch of different things. All these QC labs are really loose and really off the cuff. They're not a super PhD level scientific study of any sort at all. It's just the goal is to try to get some little nuggets of information and get them out to climbers to educate them a little bit and at least make them aware and think of it. So in JT's case, we went out to a local cliff and we were doing a bunch of wraps and then hitting it with a heat gun to see how hot it got. And we even, I think we have a little video online if I remember. We were wrapping it and we had a fishing rod, and then we would bring the belay device back up really quick and then wrap again. So we were wrapping to see how hot we could get it with multiple wraps really fast, because we didn't want to set up fixed line on some like 10 pitch route and wrap the whole thing.
And then of course have it fail and like
yeah, exactly. So we did that. We got some temperatures. We cooked some slings in the oven. We cooked some ATCs in the oven, and then we did a bunch of tension tests where we'd put the sling under tension and then push a hot ATC device against the sling to see if we could get it to melt. The end result, I haven't read that one in a long time. The end result was, you're probably okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But that's a good question. Can I use a Sharpie to mark the middle of my rope?
Right.
That's a common one. And unfortunately, a lot of these answers are kind of like, well, maybe.
Yeah. Right.
Because you don't exactly know what's in a Sharpie, because there's no like real regulations of what chemicals are in there. Any testing that I've done in the lab has shown that there's basically no difference. Years ago, the UIA did some testing on middle markers, Sharpies on the middle, and they said if you fall on the middle, like over a super sharp edge, it reduces the number of falls from, like, I forget what it was, from X to Y, 8 to 4 or whatever it was, like that. And you're like, okay, the next time I take a 150 footer onto a razor blade edge on the middle marker, I'll know to be afraid of that,
Right.
It doesn't happen that often. Yeah. So companies do sell middle markers that they make so they control
tested.
Exactly.
Right.
So that's what I would.
Because Sharpie's not going to tell you what's in that damn thing, because it's like they're like, we own the marker market.
Exactly.
They're not telling you what's in here because our markers are like
they're
a billion times better than everybody else's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would just recommend. I mean, you're
There's
probably
like
okay,
the
but I would
blood I
just recommend.
There's probably like the blood of like children in there, and that's they don't want to tell you. There's like some place, there's some volcano somewhere where they're like
maybe some sacrificing to the Sharpie gods,
because they sure do work well.
Yeah.
You kind of asked me like before we got into this, like, don't hit me with like random questions because you wanted to like you didn't want to give us bad information because you're trying to remember it.
Right.
Too bad. I'm thinking of things.
I'll make stuff up.
I'm thinking of things. Well, I mean, you reasonably have a concern that this podcast is going to go out there and you don't want to give bad information. So I understand that. So if you just back off if I hit
I'll
you
do
with
my
something.
best. Usually what we were talking about earlier is usually when people want to ask me a very technical question, I ask them to write it to me so that I can think about it and actually get real information instead of just off the cuff. Oh, it's probably 6KN or whatever.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm not going to ask you about that. But this is like I think this is a thing that's been in climbing forever, and maybe some people already got it figured out and don't want to hear about it again. But there's the forward button on the thing. But the fall factor, and the fall rating of a rope. Can we just like clear that shit up for everybody once and for all? Because it's super common. Your rope says it takes 9 falls, or 10 or whatever it happens. I don't even remember anymore.
It's somewhere in there. Yeah.
But most beginner people have this moment where they're like, well, does that mean I can only fall this many? And then what happens?
Right.
And obviously with experience, you realize you can fall like hundreds of times on your rope without dying. Anyway, so what does it mean? Help us out.
So that's a good question. So a slight disclaimer, we are not a manufacturer of ropes, so I'm by no means a rope expert, but I know enough about climbing ropes, and I actually am good friends with a bunch of the rope guys. And you break ropes. We do break ropes. So the way, I'm going to back up for a quick second, but these standards, the reason these standards are the way they are, part of like science, is testing needs to be repeatable. So when I said earlier that carabiner testing, there's no tests that even have a rope involved, it's because if you start adding a rope into a carabiner test, that's another factor. So it's not as repeatable. So tests have to be designed to be repeatable. When it comes to the rope and the fall factor rating, it's really a repeatable test in order to just benchmark one rope from the other. The reality, it doesn't have a lot to do with reality. It's a fall factor 1.78, if I remember, which is a pretty burly fall factor, not quite a fall factor 2 where you're twice the height from your last piece of gear, but it's a pretty serious fall factor. And it's on a fairly short piece of rope. And I think most climbers know that the rope it's the bungee cord in the system. So the more rope you have out, the less the impact forces are. So
so hold on.
Yeah.
Because we already, like, it took me like 10 years of my climbing career to get the factor thing.
Okay.
So let me it's a little bit of math.
Okay.
Right?
Oh boy.
Can you do it?
I'll do it in my head. I'll try.
Well,
here's the deal. If you climb 10 meters above, let's do it from a belay.
Okay.
That's because that's the way you fall factor too. Let's see you leave a belay and you get no gear in and you climb 10 feet up and you fall. You're going to fall the 10 feet that you're above the belay plus another 10 feet. That's 20 feet.
Before the rope even starts to begin.
Right.
Because, again, you just said it's not reality. Reality is different. The reality is then the rope starts to stretch and you actually literally will fall further.
Right.
But but in terms of like
but
free
the fall
falling,
factor in that case, that's a fall factor too. That's the worst you can be. You can to fall fast past your belayer.
The math is fallen twice as far as the amount
of rope you have
out.
out. Exactly. So that's what fall factor means, is how far you fell over how much rope you have out. So a fall factor 2 is the worst case, and you never want to do that. You always want to try to get some
and
gear
it's pretty
off the
much,
belay.
I mean, unless we racked our brains for like some really weird situation that's probably happening on the speed ascents of the nose. or something, but you essentially can, in a reality, you can only fall factor 2 onto the belay in a climbing situation.
Right.
Because if you have a piece of gear if you're out 10 feet and you have a piece of gear at 5 feet, you've only fallen 10 feet.
Exactly.
Because you're 5 feet above, you fall 5 feet below,
So
and then it's a factor 1.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's an English major.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Doing that.
So a fall factor 1.78 or 1.77, whatever it is, that's the test. Where that number came from, to be honest, I'm not sure. There's a short amount of rope that's out. So again, back to the repeatability. It's a short amount of rope in a drop tower at a fall factor 1.78 over a specified radius, which is a fairly sharp edge. And you just drop a mass, an 80 kilogram mass. That's what's been decided on. It's a steel mass. It's not gelatin like the body, so it doesn't absorb anything. And
2.2 pounds per kg.
Yes.
Okay.
100 and so was 8176.
Yeah. Okay.
And the belay, it's basically tied off.
Pretty standard climbing physique for
not
men.
bad. Yeah.
For a man.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anyway.
And the belay, it's basically knotted, for argument's sake, the rope. So it's a fairly harsh fall. So fall factor 1.78 with the edge over a steel edge, with the rope over a steel edge, 80 kilogram steel mass. I mean, that's a burly fall, but it's repeatable. And so that's what's been around forever. And what the fall factor of a rope means when it's 7 or 8 is how many times can a piece of rope take that fall, and you're not adjusting the knot or anything. It's falling on the same spot of the rope until it breaks. So does a fall factor 9 rope, does that take more falls than one that's rated at 6? Sure it does. Does that mean anything to most climbers out in the field? Yeah, I mean, it's a little more maybe durable, but as far as the reality of, is your rope going to break when you fall on it? No, I mean, you see that fall in real life and you're like, holy jeez,
yeah,
brutal.
You're not like just like
you're
riding
going
yourself.
home.
Yeah, exactly. You're going over. Yeah, and I was gonna say, if you are taking 9 factor 1.78 falls on your rope and you weigh 175 pounds, like you're either like in the hospital already, or
Kidneys,
but also you need to
back.
talk to someone about how to climb.
Yeah,
because you're doing something really wrong.
Yeah.
Like the basic system does not make sense to you.
Exactly.
Or you ought to get off that route if it's got that horrible crux 10 feet off the belay and you just keep taking.
No, that's a burly.
And your belayer's hurt as well.
Yeah,
because he's getting slammed into the wall, or she's getting slammed into the wall.
They're hating it. Yeah. So that's what it means. It's a repeatable test that just allows ropes to be compared to each other. And it doesn't really have a whole lot to do with reality out in the field. But it is a valid question. And you could see how someone new to climbing is like, oh, does this mean I can only fall 9 times on it? It doesn't mean that. It's just a relative scale of how, I'm not sure if I should say the word durable, but just comparative from one rope to the next.
Yeah, if your climbing buddy's like getting rid of his ropes at 9 falls, you're stoked.
Yeah,
you're just like sneaking into his garbage.
Exactly.
After every
that
trip.
One. 9 falls. That's just like a morning session for me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and that's the thing is, like, if you're climbing in the gym or whatever, and especially gyms that issue ropes, you're just like, well, god damn. I mean, these things are taking super, super damage.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's cool. Thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Is there like a really weird?
Oh, there's a really weird one,
or a test or issue that's like come up.
Oh, there's a really weird QC lab that we did.
Okay.
Yeah, it was crazy. I wish I'd read it prior to talking to you, because I'll just have to go from memory. But we had I know you warned me. That's okay.
I'm not holding up my end of the bargain.
That's okay. No, we had a harness come back. A guy sent us a harness that was basically falling apart. All the webbing was coming. It was crazy. It was falling apart. It was the threads were pink. It was just a disaster. Like, something was wrong. Like, there's no way it left, any manufacturing facility looking like that. So he sent us this harness, and then we had one of our crack QA guys look at it, and we quickly determined that it had some form of contamination for sure. Some kind of acid or something got into this harness. So I was back and forth with the owner of this harness, this young kid from somewhere in California, if I remember correctly, Oakland, I think. And we were like, hey, what's the, give me the history of this harness. Where do you store it? How much have you used it? I've been using it for years. It's always in a bag in the back of my car. I go to the gym only. And then just one day this just happened. And we get that a lot. Like, oh, this just happened. And it would be nice if people really told exactly what happened, because it just helps us understand better when you're trying to decipher this puzzle. CSI, we call it, like climbing scene investigation, right? We're trying to figure this out.
No, my friends in the ski podcast that do. Yeah. That's actually one of their beefs too.
Oh, I was just skiing along.
Oh,
and then the side of my edge just flew off my ski. Yeah. It doesn't happen like that. So this acid harness thing, we ended up getting a bunch of chemicals, like standard household chemicals, cleaning chemicals, all this kind of stuff, because we thought maybe this guy, grocery shopping or in the back of his car or whatever. And we played with all these chemicals on nylons, and we couldn't really figure it out. I mean, the end of the story actually is a little disappointing, because we never really nailed down what the issue was. He said he didn't know what happened to it. It was only in the back of his car. We thought it could be acid from a battery. It appeared that it wasn't that. I forget whether it was hydrochloric or sulfuric acid. That we got some from the university here in Utah, and we played with it, and we discovered that if you put a certain acid onto the certain type of thread, whether it was nylon or polyester, I can't remember, it turned it pink, and that's what all the thread of his harness ended up turning pink. So we determined it was some kind of acid that he had got on his harness somehow and caused it to all basically disintegrate. It was really weird, really interesting. So ultimately we never really figured out what the issue was, but then several months later, another kid emailed and said, hey, I have my harness. It's all turning pink. The threads are turning pink and it's falling apart. And he said, I know it's my fault because I didn't like the look of it. So I got some markers and spray paint and I graffitied it out. And then now it's all falling apart. And I saw your write-up on the BD website, and I think it's the same thing. I think it's the same deal. And we're like, yeah, dude, don't draw with markers and spray paint your climbing gear,
right.
And that's why on the instructions for everything we say, don't modify your gear and stuff like that. It was really interesting. It's just a good reminder, basically, don't get a bunch of spray paint and start spray painting all your nylon goods.
Yeah.
In case you weren't sure.
Yeah, it's funny because it's just some people have this, there's a whole spectrum of attitudes towards climbing, and you have the group, and I think of my era where there's this real reverence for the danger and the risk.
Yeah.
And I think maybe a criticism is in fact that's sort of being pulled out of climbing because the introduction in the gyms and stuff, and
right.
Like you just said, if you find that cam at the base of El Cap, it's going to be in the back of your mind, is that thing okay? But that would never have occurred to me to spray paint my heart, the thing that's going to keep me alive.
Yeah,
right. There's nothing between the harness breaking and you.
No, it's the real deal.
Down. Yeah, the rope and gear can fail and you catch on the next gear, but the rope and the harness, that's it.
That's the real deal. Yeah.
And the belay.
And gear, like I said earlier, gear is robust and it can last a long time. Of course, it depends how much you use it. It depends how you use it. It depends how you care for it, right? So your average weekend climber, you can have a harness that can last 3, 4, 5, 7 years, right? But a guy like you or me that's climbing all the time, you're burning through harnesses because the rope tie-in points getting all worn, or you're chimneying up stuff and you're just grinding through things, or the buckles start wearing as you're slithering up these offwoods or whatever it may be. But yeah, you got to take care of your gear. I mean, this gear is really burly and it's really put through the paces, but it isn't going to last forever, and you do have to take care of it. So when young Buddy is spray painting up his harness and then all of a sudden sees all the threads melting,
yeah.
It's sorry, come on.
Hopefully we're not making too much fun of you, buddy, if you're listening. But don't spray paint your stuff. And
it's a good lesson.
It's also, again, I still have to go back and I have the feelings for the dirtbags because our compatriot JT has. I can get harnesses from you guys,
right?
Because you sponsor my show.
Yeah,
and
I just gave you one today.
He's had to yell at me
Right.
Because I've showed up with the harness that I don't think it was unsafe, but it was getting pretty worn out. And for a guy who can just say, hey, can I have a new harness?
Right.
You know, and I'm joking about it, but tragically, you know, that was Todd Skinner's demise. And he was in the exact same boat of being able to get a new harness, but
and he
well, the other problem aside from the money is you get these sentimental attachments to climbing gear.
Yeah.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's your good old harness that got you up that and that and that and that. And, you know, and it's also like, I'll admit too that like
it's a badge of honor.
Yeah. Well, you know, I've often joked that you don't want to show up at the cliff with all brand new gear.
Right.
You know, everybody's going to roll their eyes like, what's about to happen?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah. You show up and your harness is a little, and you got the, you know, if you're sport climbing, but you got the rubbed out chimney side, it just tells everybody that like this isn't
the
my
only
first
thing I do.
rodeo.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, I feel for you guys out there, but you know, again, like a couple hours of work for most of us, even 4 or 5 if you're, you know, working minimum wage, and you can start to save up enough money to get a harness or whatever.
But, you know, it's true though, but you just can't take the dirt out of dirt bag. You know, it's really tough, and we're all just as bad. I'm just as bad. I use a rope longer than I should, you know, just because I don't want to be wasteful.
Right.
You know?
Well, and it's also like, you just said like you're friends with all these rope guys,
right?
But you know, it's like you don't want to be the guy that's just like always emailing.
Hey,
Hey bro, can I
send
get
me a
another
rope?
Yeah. You know, how about it? Can I get another rope? Yeah. So, anyhow, all right. Well, anything else you want to? We've cranked through this hour. It's been really fascinating. Is there anything else you want us to walk away with in terms of like dealing with gear or bothering you about it or?
No, I mean, I don't mind being bothered. For sure, I get lots of questions. You know, these QC Lab things are out there. In the last year or so, I think Rock and Ice has picked them up. We have a deal with those guys, so they're pumping them out as well. Yeah,
they're on their wetsite too.
So it's great just to try to get information out there. We, Black Diamond, we do it in our way. And just by doing these QC Labs, Petzl has some really great information out there. DMM does some stuff similar as well. Just trying to educate the climbers out there to just little nuggets. If you can just get a couple nuggets here and there of stuff to look for, stuff to think about, how to inspect your gear, how long your gear lasts, gear doesn't last forever, that kind of stuff. And I do get specific questions. I try my best to answer them. It's not always possible or easy, but people can email me through the VD website. They can find me on there, just KP at Black Diamond or whatever. Yeah.
And I forgot to ask you when we were talking about, where's the recall information still?
It would be on the Black Diamond website somewhere. I actually can't remember what it's.
Okay, I'll put it in
under.
I'll put it in the outro.
Yeah, the recall information is there somewhere. The QC Lab information is somewhere in there. I can't remember how it's laid out.
Okay, cool. All right, dude. Thanks a lot for sitting down.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, folks. Thanks for listening, and thank you to Kolin for sitting down. I think it was an enlightening episode. I learned a little bit. Hopefully you guys learned some stuff, or maybe it brought up more questions, but you have a place to start anyway. Might be fun to do another episode. There's lots to talk about when you get into the whole nerdy world of engineering and gear. Be nice to have maybe another perspective on the show from another company down the line. But thanks again to Kolin for doing that. And I posted the links to the recall and to his QC Labs with this post on the website, enormocast.com, so check that out. The QC Labs are cool, a lot of good stuff over there, a lot of good videos, and if you get confused, you can probably just email Kolin, and he might even answer your questions. He's pretty hot on the email, a lot better than I am, actually. Okay, speaking of the website, of course, my normal spiel here. If you want to help out the Enormocast, you can go to enormocast.com, click on the Help Out tab, and do something to keep the show moving along through the internets. Keep it popular somehow. Write a review, like the Facebook page. Go on down the line. Bunch of stuff you can do to help the show. Make sure and tell your friends. Still finding people out there that never heard of this thing. So yeah, tell your friends. Get everybody on board, please. And now that you're out there looking down at all your gear, wondering, God, is that going to work? Is there everything I heard? Do remember that the first thing that needs to happen is you have to check your knot.
and sled dogs, lots of lumber and lumber.